my name is Christina Nicolo, and I didn't personally have an NDE, but my infant son, back in March of 2002, he had a terrible accident. He had fallen from the second story of our home into the basement level of our home. I was working from home that evening, and I heard my husband call my name at the time, and I thought, oh my gosh, the house must be on fire or he's having a heart attack. It was just the way he called me that I never had heard him call me. And I just instinctively knew something was really terrible. Um, so even just thinking about it now, my heart's racing because it was such a horrific experience. So I left my office and went into my dining room to see my then husband holding my 8-month-old infant son, lifeless, in his hands. Um, I recognize now because this event actually caused me to become a nurse. I left the financial industry and became a nurse, and I know now that the type of breathing that my son was demonstrating was what we call chain stoke breathing, and it's usually end of life breathing or breathing that occurs when there's, brain swelling or heart failure. Um, so I we called 911. I did end up riding in the ambulance, in the front of the ambulance, um, and my son was in the back, and all I could do was just pray. I just prayed the entire time. Oh God, please don't let my son die. Please don't let my son die. And I just prayed over and over. It was like breathing. All I did was pray for my son. Um, we ended up getting to a local community hospital in our area. We live right outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And again, I just continued to pray the entire time. My son wasn't doing well. Like I said, his heart stopped twice in the ambulance on the way, to the local community hospital. When my husband arrived, they ended up air flighting my son to the hospital, to Boston Children's, to the ICU. And again, as we drove, to the hospital, I just prayed. I didn't know what else to do. I just prayed the entire time that God would save my baby, but it wasn't looking good. When we finally arrived at the hospital, we were questioned. It was just a horrific time in our life. It's horrific experience. They were questioning me and my husband. Obviously, like what happened to the baby, what type of accident happened, and so it was here. Here we are thinking, oh, is my son going to be okay? But also we were being questioned, and it was really horrifying. Um, we finally got him to the ICU and got settled. It was, probably, early morning by this time. And my husband had gone home to take care of our other children. And, he wasn't doing well. He was seizing because he had so much brain, increased cranial pressure. So he was seizing at the time. I didn't really understand what was happening because I wasn't in the medical field. I just knew it wasn't good. Um, and it was just very scary, very lonely. And then finally in the morning, somebody had come. It was a grief counselor who had come to talk to me about my son because the doctors didn't think he was going to make it. They really couldn't give me much of a prognosis, but his brain was massively swollen. His skull was fractured in several places. His heart had already stopped twice, um, and they were having a hard time controlling his seizures. Um, and it finally hit me when the grief counselor came to see me in the morning that my son might not make it. I mean, he's probably going to die. And it was really a scary time. And I just remember, um, after that counselor had left the room, I locked myself in the bathroom and I got to my knees and I just prayed. I was panicked. I didn't know what to do. I just over and over just prayed, God, please save my baby, please. And I was just so helpless and so hopeless at that time. And during that time in the bathroom, as I just cried out, poured out my heart to God, I just had I heard, I wouldn't hear it audibly, but it was in my mind. It stopped all that turmoil. And I heard these words, but not audibly, but it was so powerful that it stopped that storm I was in. And the voice said to me, "You're going to walk through this valley, but at the end of this journey, not a hair on his head is going to be harmed." And I knew in that instant that my son would live. It was still scary. We still spent an entire week in ICU in Boston Children's. Um, but he did get better. And that it was, God did, I believe, spoke to my heart. And my son to this day, thank God, is there's not a single thing wrong with him. All of the MRIs and scans that we had subsequently all confirmed that, he was perfectly fine, and he to this day has no residual effect, from his accident. So thankfully, my son was totally fine, and life, resumed back to normal. We had the stairwell fixed. We had everything was safe in our house, and thank God he, had no residual effects. And one day, probably about the time he was two and a half, I was working again in my office, and he was sitting on the floor. He used to love to line up those little matchbox cars, and he was lining up matchbox cars on the floor and doing whatever he was doing. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he started to violently crash the cars into each other, and he started to roll his body all over the floor. And he said to me, now he was probably two and a half, I'm guessing. He was very young, but he said some words. And he said, "Mama, when I fell down, I died. I went to heaven." Um, and I was like, I was kind of taken aback, and I was like, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "I fell down. I went down the stairs and I died." And as he got older and as his vocabulary advanced, he started to say more and more things. I never tried to ask him because I knew that something had happened. Just that miraculous experience that I had in the hospital on the bathroom floor, I just knew that something special had happened. I knew it was a miracle that he survived and that he didn't have any residual effects from that horrific accident. He never required medication. He never required any follow up care. He's just completely healed from that fall. Um, so when he told me, I was surprised really that he knew about the fall, more so than him saying that he went to heaven. I was more surprised that he knew because we never talked about it. It was an experience that we all wanted to forget. And we certainly didn't want to let him know. I did plan on telling him, but I wanted to tell him when he was older, when he was an adult and he could handle it. Um, so over the next few months and years, he talked about heaven and God all the time. He said, as a matter of fact, when we would drive in the car and the sun would be streaming through the window from his car seat, he would often look at the sun and say, "Look, Mummy, it's Jesus," or "Look, Mummy, it's God." And I would say, "No, that's just the sun." But he said that God looks like the sun, but it didn't hurt his eyes. And one time, shortly after he told me about his NDE, um, I asked him. I said, "What's God like?" And he was just a baby. I mean, between 2 and 3 years old. And he got this very serious look on his face. I just remember the countenance on his face. And he kind of had this far off look, and his eyes just welled up with tears. And he just said, "He just loves us so much." And it was just so powerful. Like even now, it's making me tear up because I know he experienced something really truly miraculous and powerful. Um, Another time we were driving in the car, and it was evening, and we were behind an ambulance that was just transporting somebody because it didn't have its flashers on, and we could see inside. And he must have been about 3 and a half by this time. So he was a little bit older. And he said, "Mommy, I don't like that big truck." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Why not? They're helping people. They're bringing people to the hospital and they're helping them." And he said, "No, I don't like it." He said, "They put that big thing on my head." And he must have been referring to like they put the stabilizer on his head. They don't put the C collars on little babies when they suspect head injury or a spinal injury. They put instead like this big external device on their head. And he goes, I didn't like it when I was in there. It was scary, and I didn't like that big thing they put on my head. So it was just little things like that, but it became so commonplace. He talked about it's like going to a trip to grandma's house. Um, Another time I remember very specifically, we were on the back porch. It was summertime, and he was a bit older, and whenever he talked about these experiences, he would just kind of bring them up randomly. We didn't ask him about it. I made sure not to, because like I said, I didn't want to taint his memory or his experience with my own thoughts or feelings. And he said, Mama, he said, God sits on a big chair. I said, really? And he said, a big chair like a king. And I said, oh, do you mean a throne? And he said, yeah, he sits on a throne like a king. And he said, but under his chair, there's a river. The river comes out from his chair. And he said, but when I looked into it, he said it wasn't water. It was the stars and the universe and the galaxy. And it went on forever and ever and ever. So it was little nuggets like that he just kind of shared over the years. He said that God told him that he had to come back home to his mother and father when he was there, and he always talked about God being light, like the sunshine, and he talked often about his eyes. He said that God's eyes were bright like fire, but not fire. He said like all the colors of the rainbows were in his eyes. Um, and, as he got older, he went to school telling people that he went to heaven, that he saw God. And he became ridiculed. So he learned to stop sharing the experiences. I wish he hadn't. Now he sort of feels like it makes him odd. And it's just my prayer that, that those little pearls, those little treasures, those nuggets from heaven, if you will, that they'll stay with him and he'll remember them. And when he's ready, he'll be able to share them. And I would love to hear his own account as an adult, but he's a grown man now with a life, and he does remember it. He says, even though he was 8 months old when he clinically died, he still recalls going to heaven, but he doesn't feel really comfortable talking about it in public. Um, but there was one other thing that happened after his near death experience. It was probably about 3 months afterwards, and I had some local thing to go to for my older children's school. And I wasn't going to go because after the accident, I really didn't let Joseph out of my sight. Um, you know, Number one, because he was at risk for having seizures for up to a year, they said. So, and just because, it was just, I was always afraid of another accident. So I just always wanted him near me. He slept in bed with me for a year afterwards. I just always had him by my side. Um, but my older children really wanted me to attend this event at school. Um, it was a volunteer thing, and I really couldn't bring him. So I brought him to my girlfriend's house, and she was watching him, and I was just nervous about leaving him. And so I was driving to my children's school, and I was just praying, and I was like, God, please protect my son. Please make sure he's okay. He doesn't have a seizure while I'm gone. Or I was just nervous. And it was almost like that time I was in the bathroom and I had heard or felt that voice that told me my son was going to be okay. But this time I had a vision, and in the vision I saw my son playing on the floor at my girlfriend's house as a baby. Well, he was a baby. He must have been like a little over a year at this point. And I very clearly saw three angels standing around him, like making like a almost a wall around him. But they weren't. It wasn't my. I really know it wasn't my imagination or me daydreaming, because the image of the angels that I had this vision of didn't look like anything I would have imagined. I would have imagined these very feminine, looking angels with long flowing hair and wings, but I didn't. I saw three very tall, fierce looking warriors that were protecting my son. And I knew from that moment on that my son was truly protected and in the hands of God. I would say what I've learned from this experience is that um, God is real, God is faithful, and that He answers our prayers. Prior to prior to this experience, I remember reading a story about a family, actually a pastor whose son died tragically in a car accident. And the months leading up to my son's accident, I remember really praying and saying, God, why do bad things happen to people? Um, and really questioning, like why tragedies happen, why people have to die, why accidents happen. And it was like I just felt like God was trying to teach me or show me that bad things happen, but if we trust him, he'll get us through them. I know not everybody's child who's in a horrific accident comes back. Um, but I do believe that God would have still gotten me through that experience. Even if my son hadn't come back, he would have given me the strength to get through it. But I think there was a bigger lesson that he wanted to show me and to teach me. And I'm just glad that I had the opportunity to experience it, because I think that it's worth sharing. And I do know that prayer is powerful, because all I did was pray. I had no other coping mechanisms. So I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and God answered me and he saved my baby.